Good evening, everyone. It is 6 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get started with our meeting this evening. There are 7 board members present. We'll move to item 2A, adoption of the agenda. What are the wishes of the board?
I move to adopt the agenda.
Second.
Motion passes 7-0.
Item 3A is public comments. Anyone wishing to provide public comments should complete the request to submit comments form. This form will need to be completed by 1 p.m. on Wednesday, the day of the board meeting. Casey, are there any comments?
We do not have any.
Thank you. We will move on to the consent agenda. The items listed on the consent agenda are to be considered by the Board of Education to be routine business items. Approval of the items may be made by a single motion, second, and majority vote with no separate discussion of any item listed. Should a member of the board desire to discuss any item at his or her request, it will be removed from the consent agenda and considered separately. What are the wishes of the board?
I move to approve the consent agenda as submitted.
Second.
Motion passes 7-0.
And as always, a big thank you to our community members for their generosity, whether it's through donations or grants. We truly appreciate your support of our students. Item 6A is Observe for Success Walkthrough Tool Presentation.
We have Dr. Erica Mickelson, Director of Teaching and Learning, and Mrs. Tara Glaines, Director of Student Services, here to present a walkthrough tool that we will be using in our classrooms.
Areas? Oh, thank you. It said do not touch, so I was just following directions. Sorry, I'm a rule follower here. So anyway, let me gather myself here. So that data is used not only to find those areas that we want to celebrate, but also to identify those areas that might need some intentional focus, and just so that we can grow those areas as well. So from that feedback, if we do determine that additional conversations need to be had based on that feedback that was provided to the teacher, we would set up those face-to-face meetings with those teachers to do that, okay?
And then we wanted to show some examples and samples of what the teachers would see or what the administrators would see. So you can see right there, this is our district walkthrough tool. So moving forward into this year, we're going to have a district tool so we can collect some overall district information. And then we're also going to have, as Tara said, we can customize this, customized building school walkthroughs as well. So you can see this is just a snapshot of the very front page, the very first page of that walkthrough tool, and you can see some engagement pieces. You can also see some capturing kids' hearts pieces in there, some classroom management, but it goes over many other areas as well, including the learning that's happening in place in the classrooms, whether it's whole group, small group, one-on-one, whether they're doing an assessment. Lots of different things can be looked at and covered during that time. And the next one. And then this is a sample of the reports that you might find after you're done with a walkthrough. And you have to be able to compile some. You have to have a few walkthroughs to be able to look at some data this way. This is just a snapshot of a few of those areas that you could see in that sample, the walkthrough tool in the previous slide. So you can see culture for learning with capturing kids' hearts. You can see teacher engagement. And then you can also see some student active participation. The great thing with this tool is the easy to determine and look at just graphs, because it's something that just does it for you. So in the past, we've had to compile those and we have to kind of create our own. Now this Observe for Success platform does all of that graphing and determination for us. So it's very instant to see the successes, and as we said, maybe those areas that we can tweak or look closer at. And then the next one, so last year when we brought Observe for Success to the district, to the principals, we really just wanted them to familiarize themselves with the tool and get used to using it. We took some feedback, worked with the Observe for Success folks and made sure that we had things set. And then we spent the spring really looking at how we could formalize some of those and make them building specific. So that was my task kind of with the principals, with each principal, of just what does it need to look like for Walnut, because they use some different things, or their focus is slightly different at Walnut and Logan Avenue, and then at the high school and middle school where we have Avid, just making sure some of those things were added in there as well. So this year, in August, we're really going to get that baseline information district-wide, and that's when we'll use that district classroom walkthrough tool. And then starting in September, we are going to have our first quarter vertical calibration walkthrough. So we will have some administrators, and really that vertical would be maybe the high school principal with an elementary principal. They would go to the high school and use the high school's tool. And then they would then go to the elementary school and use that elementary school's tool as well. So really giving them that view of what's happening at their own building, but then also what's happening across the district. We hope that they're going to be excited about this. It also gives them time away in a different building, just for that collaboration and conversation as well with district administrators. We wanted to keep it small, so it is going to be a partner, a pair that goes out, because we know how that can feel for teachers of having a big group come into the classroom. So trying to make it as minimal as we could, but then give us that feedback that we know we need. So you can see just the year at a glance. We're hoping to be done with those end-of-year walkthroughs in April, because we know how crazy May gets, and with all the end of the school year activities. And then, what questions do you have? We're very excited that the usability and user-friendliness of this tool is really what sold us. And just the work that Observe for Success, they are extremely, anytime I email, they are back to me within that day, sometimes just like instantly after. So that just communication and instant feedback is wonderful for them to work with.
What questions do we have?
I have a couple of questions. I love anything that has an easy-to-access app.
Yes,
And
yes.
that gets you such great data. So one of the questions I have, just based on the walkthrough plan, so over the course of a school year, how many times might a teacher get a walkthrough report?
So that would determine on the amount of teachers in each building. So it will be probably a little bit less at the middle school and high school just because they have a lot more teachers. But then we also have all administrators are doing this. So assistant principals and the head principal, the lead principal of all the buildings. So, and then you get to Jones where there's not very many teachers. And so we'll work on with Mrs. McGee and just make sure she knows she doesn't have to be in every classroom that many times because that could get a lot and a little bit, probably feel like a little much for some of the teachers. But they should be, the principals should be in and out at least a couple times throughout the year because we're asking them to get in at least 5 times the month of August. They've been getting in 5 times in the month of August. And the 5 times is just 5 different teachers. And remember, it's 3 to 5 minutes. So it's a quick kind of pop in, see how it's going, and then you go. So each of those areas, there is a kind of a button you can hit that says not looked for. Because if they go in, if a principal goes in and they're looking at student engagement, all the other areas wouldn't be unchecked. I mean, we don't want teachers to think, oh, they didn't see that. It was just not being observed at that time or looked for at that time.
So, excuse me, so just to clarify, you talked about it, but on the vertical walkthroughs, are those so there's another set of eyes, or is it just see what another level, the high school is doing versus elementary, or?
Both. Yes, so both. It's another set of eyes, but it's also more data for us on that district level to see what is happening at each of the levels and what do we need, like in the area of teaching and learning specifically, what do we need to offer as far as professional learning or clarifications maybe on some things that we need to do, especially when you look at specific things. Some of our elementary schools do whole brain teaching, so making sure that if that's something that we need to bring back or need to do more professional development, we can really focus on that. And then you look at the high school with AVID, and some of our elementary administrators haven't seen AVID in practice. And so it's just that time where they can really see what is going on in a different building.
This all sounds so great. I love how the teachers get feedback right away, and I also love the graphs too.
Yes.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, thank you. Okay, item 7A is from our previous meeting. This is the Facility Usage Committee discussion.
And Mrs. Pam Stranathan, Assistant Superintendent of Business Operations, is going to share a little bit about what that committee could look like and members, and then talk about board representation on that committee.
Absolutely. So looking at that, putting that together, we know that it's going to take a time frame potentially to revamp and to take a look at that and come up with suggestions and stuff is going to take potentially throughout the entire year. To give true time to that and to the ability to look at other districts and do some comparisons. So a recommendation to get a commitment from a strong group of people is to keep that committee from not being too large and to try to keep it around 10 people. From there, looking at if the board wants to place two people, one, what that number looks like would be determined to try to get people from each level because all of the buildings have some sort of facility usage going on in there. And then from there, have a discussion of going out to the buildings and maybe asking for a couple of people off of their PTOs or PTAs to also be a part of that. So I think going back to the principals, they'll have some suggestions of people that are actively involved or wanting to be actively involved from those PTOs or PTAs. So that's the recommendation going forward with that. It can be adjusted, changed. It's just putting it out there to see what your thoughts are in reference to that.
Sometimes when board members are ready to speak, we lock eyes, and it's like, a stare down until, someone picks to go. But I just wanted a little more discussion about, I think we're looking at a number of 10 people, you said?
Yeah, we can keep it around that. I think we get bigger than.
Anything bigger than that would be too much.
You start running people not coming in,
Right.
or, what is that? I think 10 we can keep, engaged.
So without having, wanting to get into the discussion of each specific person and who they represent, like the idea of having representation from the different buildings, in particular the buildings that maybe experience the most facility use. I feel like we should try to find a spot or a group of folks who could perhaps represent those people who have been impacted by this policy the most. I don't know who that would be, but I feel like that group of people should be a part of the discussion. And I would really suggest that we try to find a person in the community who maybe works in insurance, maybe like an insurance agent who could help serve on this committee as well, to kind of have that perspective of the insurance issues. Because the thing that really always stands out to me when we've discussed this is the liability that might happen to the people who are hosting things on our facilities who don't have their own insurance policy. And I feel like an insurance agent might have some perspective there about those issues that would be helpful for us. What does everyone else think?
I would actually disagree on an insurance agent. I think it's better to maybe go out and get that information if we need it on the committee, but I feel like there could be a conflict of interest as well, especially if like that person wanted business from any of the groups, that I feel like there could be a conflict of interest, and I would want us to sort of stay clear of that as well.
I do not have a thought about an insurance person. I looked at you, Jeremy, because I was trying to make a list of all of the buildings and how many people that might be, because I do agree that we should keep the number small, but I also just want to make sure that we have adequate representation from all facets of the community, and that if we have quite a few buildings plus and board members, that we might get over 10. So I wonder if there is a happy medium, like maybe, I don't know if every building needs to have representation,
Yeah.
or if we could be flexible to be like 10 to 15.
I could see, like, my thinking was kind of like, for sure, one board member, one district administrator person, EHS, EMS, and then I would like to see someone from Riverside or Timmerman, because there are bigger buildings, and then maybe one from, like, Walnut, William Allen White Village. Not all of them, but like to represent like the smaller scale schools, just so we don't get too big.
Yeah, I agree.
So to
Leslie.
clarify that, one of the things I've already done, I asked the principals if, to start off with, if I could get one representing each level. So one from the high school, which I assume it's going to be, Bo or somebody that's directly involved with the, and then maybe Adrian, I'm assuming, I'm not committing them. And then at the elementary to grab, I'd like to grab two at the elementary.
Me too.
One at one of the buildings that's really being used. And I have put out to the buildings and asked for feedback from them in reference to what's being used. I asked three very simple questions, what's the numbers, what are they seeing being used, what's the purpose of what it's being used for, and then just some demographics of that. And so that information I'll share back with the board, but that's telltale of which building is coming in with the volume that's really high. So, because I think if we get everybody, one from every building, it takes up 10 seats really quick. I mean,
Right.
it's done.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
sorry about that. That was not clear on.
No, that's okay. That's okay. And I also think, especially when we look at selecting members that are not at buildings, like someone from a PTO, it's always wise to be prudent about which parts of the community are being represented and who has voice when we are being intentional about putting together a committee.
As we're talking about PTO type people, but I would also think about parents or, sports teams or something that has a history of using them, so that line of thinking, opinions are represented also potentially.
I'd hope we'd have someone off of Park and Rec, and they would, have a recommendation too of somebody, because they deal with a lot of the coaches that are not, employees of Parks and Rec, so.
Because I could kind of see so if we had a board member, EHS, EMS, 2 elementary, someone as district representation, that puts us at 6, right? And then I could kind of see, this is just my thinking, a soccer coach, like a youth soccer, a youth baseball, a youth basketball, and a youth wrestling. Because I feel like those are the groups that most frequently use our buildings. But it doesn't have to be, because I know we did want to consult with PTO as well, because it's their buildings that they're, putting in the extra money and extra time for.
Well, and I would just say, like Pam mentioned, the district has partnered with the rec center for sports, and so we have those two groups, the rec center programming, and then we have the, like, travel sports team, so making sure they're all, because they're all kind of taking turns with our facilities at this point, too, so maybe even scheduling that a little better, especially the outside part.
I am wondering if we shouldn't think about two board members. You know, we have two board members on the insurance committee, and sometimes just nice to have a backup sometimes because we're all really busy with jobs. So that was just something that I would put out there as a possibility.
Or if like first, like alternate.
Yeah, probably not as formal as like an IBB alternate, but like when we had the COVID task force, there was sort of an alternate board member.
Right.
I know, sorry, I felt your shudder.
Yeah. Are we deciding tonight?
Yes, well, that's what I was about to ask. So
So what else?
what,
So I think a motion would be made, not necessarily about the committee, because we've already decided we were moving forward, but as in reference, a motion from you all, which board members would be representing in that, so.
okay. So two people, which I agree, having an alternate might be helpful. Things come up. So who would be interested in serving on this committee?
I would do it, but, you know, like, my wife would be somebody who'd be perfect on this
yeah.
committee, so if she's on it, then I don't want to be on it. But I would be an alternate if,
Yeah, I would be willing to be on it.
Okay. So we'll do Jen as primary? Is that what we're thinking? And then, okay.
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly both go to the meetings. Okay, so we need that in a motion.
Would we actually have an alternate, or we just have two board members on the committee?
I'm fine
just-
with just two.
Yeah, I don't think we need to denote titles, you know, of who's primary, who's secondary.
Aren't you saying you didn't want to be on there if Amanda was on there? I'm
Yes.
fine with it. I don't think,
I'm going to just make a loud assumption. I think Amanda's probably going to be on it. So, not.
Thank you,
She
sir.
hasn't been told yet, but tonight, we just announced it.
well, then I
so.
guess we just have to, like, Art, do you feel like that's a conflict of interest for you?
I don't think it's a conflict of interest, but just both of us being there.
Because I think that would be
As
awesome.
long as you guys don't disagree, it's
And
not a
you'd
conflict.
be saving the planet and carpooling.
I just think it would be great because Leslie was a parent whose kids did a lot of sports, too.
I am also willing to serve, but, yeah. I really thought you were pretty
Well, in
pumped
all
about it.
fairness, we have to think about our principals too. And so that might feel a little bit uncomfortable to have a couple. I'm just going to put that out there
Okay.
on the committee. So unless it is very clear that there's not a conflict of interest and but that perspective is important.
For the board members or for Art and Amanda?
Well, anybody.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
I will entertain any motion.
I will make a motion after our discussion to appoint Jen Thomas and Leslie Seeley as the USD253 board members to this committee.
Second.
Motion passes 7-0.
Okay, great. I'm really excited to see the work that this committee does, and hopefully we
Yeah.
can come up with some great ideas for how to improve facility usage. Thank you both for volunteering your time on this. Okay, that brings us to item 7B, the 2024-2025 USD 253 budget review.
Okay, we have Pam Stranathan. We also have Mrs. Kate Cape, Director of Business, joining as well.
Oh, all right. The fun stuff, right? So we kept it very condensed like we did in the past. I think it's the important parts of the budget. You have the whole budget and also an electronic version and also a physical version. In the front part of your binder, you will find the PowerPoint, and you will also find supporting documents that are also digital. So I'm going to start with just our second page there, which is not the cover page. It just talks about all the documents and information that's in the PowerPoint. Some of it will go in detail, some it's just going to be representation for you to look at. Going to the next page, same mission and vision that we have in reference to engaging, empowering, and inspiring, and going for what building futures for our students. Then you'll see on that next page, which is the priorities. Those are the 3 priorities that the district goes by when they're looking at whether it's our buildings, the district in general, or our communication and working with the public. So what's important about those is those goals should match things that we're doing in the district with our budget. And what is really nice is that we do have the needs assessment, and I have a list that was really nice to look at and to be able, a guiding principle, and that was the list that came out when the board met with the principals. And to be able to have, I think the major part of that list is to be able to go in there and to go back and talk with the buildings and try to, figure out, okay, what exactly did you mean with that? What are your needs? And then to drive our budget. So on the next slide there, you're going to see what we did was you got to have results. If we're going to have something that we looked at last year in reference to the budget, what were those results? And I think what's really incredible, this is not everything without going on to more slides, but to look at all the things on the academic side and the operations side that we can say, yes, we did do that. That is what we spent our budget on, whether it was staff, or whether it was going into the buildings and improving what we have and what we've had going on that needed to be improved. And I just think from both sides, it's very obvious, looking at our classroom sizes on our results sides with our academic, and then going over to the other side and looking at what our buildings now, when you're going into those buildings and looking at them, and to feel proud about those. So anybody have any questions on the results? Everybody in this room is responsible for this, not just me, and are here. I even had Corey come in. And if anybody has any questions for them right now before we go on. All right. You let them off the hook. But, all right, so the next 2 things, what you're going to see here is this slide 6 and 7 are just different versions of our funds by function. So this is the really condensed version of all that information you see. These are the things that we have to put out there and the comparisons of what's being spent. So think of this more the global, not the objects and the things that we deal with more or less on day-to-day. So if you look at the budget at a glance on 6 and then you look at 7, you'll also see where the money difference is coming in for each of those of what we're looking at. So for instance, the instruction side with teachers, salaries and things along that line, you see that's bumped up quite a bit from what it was in the past. Keep in mind that is due to when we get into Form 150, how that money is formulated and it goes back in based off of our student numbers and based off of our state-based aid. So, but it's nice to look at that and have a little bit of comparison to see where we've added money or we've taken it. And if we've taken it away, like for instance on capital improvement, it's because we reallocated when we talked about in IBB about some salaries and what we were going to do, and we can move some of those salaries over to our capital and take that pressure off of the general budget to be able to apply those then back to our teachers. So it's not that we're not doing much there anymore. We were just able to move some of that. So the next few items we'll talk about is the proposed notice of the hearing, Form 150, mill rates and exceeding the revenue neutral. We're going to skip down to Form 150, so it's on page 10. And 2 things we need to look at that are really important on this. Up at the top, the first one, that is our numbers that we are reporting up there. So there's 2 things we put in when we go to the state and when we run this big document. The first one we put in there is our student numbers at 4,300. So a little bit about that is last year our number, we started off with a number of 4129. And then remember, we had our audit and we came back and we had to republish because those numbers came back at 4,200. So what happened, that caused us to go over our budget and we had to republish it. So what we did is we put a little bit of buffer in there, which you can do, and put it at 4,300, hoping we don't have to come back and republish at that point. So now that number, if you take that number and then you go down there to the bottom, and our state-based aid is now at the 5,370, where it was at 5,080, we're seeing an increase there. So what's happening is we went up 170, we have in there for students, and then the state-based aid went up 290. So overall, compared to last year, we've gone up about $2 million. That is generated, that could possibly come in as long as our audited numbers stay up where they need to stay. So that's good news, right? So going back to the prior page, on page 9, this is where we start seeing where we started doing those calculations and how we set that budget. So what you're seeing up there at the very top is that we had put in those adjusted years of what we published at. And remember, our publishing budget is a little bit higher than what our actual expenditure is, so that, once again, we don't have to republish it, right? And so you can see across there on those first two lines, 6 and 8, where the budget, we budgeted 34 and we only spent 33 million. And then you go over to the next line, same thing, 36, 35, and then we've put out there 41. And with our projections, we should spend lower than that. The nice thing about all of this is that we can adjust and bring in money based off of our LOB, but one of the things that we've tried to do is we've tried to keep the overall mills at below the 55. And we are butting right up to that at this point because we're able to move a little bit in reference to our LOB. We can't do anything with our general up there. It's got to be 20. We can't do anything else. Remember that statute. But we can mess with the LOB, which the LOB, to come up with what that 29% is that's taking the 12 million and dividing it out with the 41, which the 12 million is 29.9% of that. So we're really close. The state average is 32, and you all voted for it to go up to the max of 33. If we mess with that number to try to gain more money back, then what happens is it's going to raise our mill. So the other option we have is you go down to our debt, our bond and interest, and if you notice there, our bond and interest has gone down because as we continue to make payments on there, it will reduce, and there's some things in there that we can do with that number and to help, and a lot of times that's where you'll see we'll put more into that, so the bond and interest will pay, but it'll give us more money back, or it'll lower it. So. And one of the things that was really interesting is if you look down there at the total used expenditures where it says 54,995, which is our, where we're at, our mills trying to keep, just moving that a little bit gave us back, $300,000 into our budget. So it doesn't take much to get it there. So in the future, we'll be coming back, not this future, but next year, and having some conversations about what we can potentially do with our bond and interest to bring back money into that LOB so that we have money every year coming in. That would be consistent. So as that bond and interest keeps adjusting and lowering, then it puts us in a better place to do better with our investments that we have in the bond and interest. So any questions on this section right here? Because we'll jump over to what the mills look like next. A lot of this we can't do a lot with. We can't change. I mean, we put in those figures and then it populates. We go and we get, recommendations of something maybe we could move, but it's not a lot. Like there's not any big chunk of anything we can move within this when it's being published. So any questions right off, Jamie?
I have a couple of questions on
Yep.
the budgeted expenditures. So I always like to look at, big differences between our actuals from last year and then our budget for this year. So there are a couple that jumped out at me.
Okay.
And the first one is on special education. We're going up from almost 7 million to 9.5 million. And that's good to have that much money, but I just wanted to get your take on why is that so different this year?
Okay, so I'm going to let Kate step up because Kate got the pleasure of working on that one this year. I'll let her share a little bit about that.
So a lot of that has to do with actually the work that's being done about the additional contributions, and those have to do with payments to the co-op, and then our mandatory transfers we have from the state, that calculates it, and that number is that's where that number is what we're mandatorily allowed to transfer.
Great, thank you. And the next one is, I see that on the food service, there's a pretty big difference between years. And I just wondered, and I know food expenses and have really gone up too, and I just was wondering what that was.
So a little bit, and Kate can jump in on this, is that there were some adjustments that were made in prior years that were put over there, and we had to bring that back to a balance where it needed to be. And because they can only hold so much, and then there's a point where the auditors come in at us and say, hey, you've got too much over in your food service, we have to be careful because there's certain expenditures that can come out of there only. And so we had to get that balance back out where we needed it. All right, so we're going to move on, and Kate begged me to speak in front of you all, which I'm going to tell you that's not the norm for people wanting. But we talked about, I said absolutely, you step right up there. But just on that page that we were just on, just so you know, on page 9, over there to the right, this is the reference that back to our tax levies that comes back to impact our revenue neutral. So we're just wanted to share, we didn't put that on a separate slide this year. So I'm going to give this over to Kate. She'll touch just briefly again on the mill rates, and then she's going to talk to you a little bit about the revenue neutral.
As the year goes on, I put a lot of work into the budget, so it's always nice to talk with all of you and share the information and what we've done. One of the disadvantages of the mill rates is we don't have a lot of numbers we can play with. The 20 mills for the general fund are set by state statute, so that is what it is. Capital outlay, given what we spent last year, it's probably not in our best interest to reduce that. It's at the max we can levy now, so it's between the bond and interest and the supplemental general. And two things to keep in mind with that are, one, in order to increase that much, we would have to go over that 55 that we're really trying to stay under. The other factor in that is, Casey, if you go to the next slide, please. You'll notice when you look here, we are very close to those revenue neutral tax rates. And the downside of that, we don't want to use more money than we have to, but with recruiting and retaining staff, we've had to increase those costs, is that we're very close to that revenue neutral rate. If we don't exceed it, we're on a very different timeline with our budget. Because we exceed the revenue neutral rate, we have that other additional time to get the information out to the taxpayers, to have the hearing to work on that. If we did not exceed the revenue neutral rate, we would have to have held this meeting and our hearing and have it to the state by August 20th. So that's a month earlier in the year than what we do right now. So those are all considerations as we move forward each year to look at where are we at, what are we going to do, what's our timeline? Because if it's a month earlier, it's a very different timeline. Any questions on that or where we stand?
All right, so moving on, our next steps. Oops,
And
sorry.
It seems like in
over
the
you.
past, there was a comment made, and I could be wrong here, but that all districts would exceed the neutral revenue just because of how it works, no matter
Yeah.
what.
So
Is that
I think
right?
that's interesting because, yes, that statement was made. And now, just talking at the state level, they're seeing more and more districts that are not able to do that. And so if we push some of our other areas, our general, our capital, if we really started pushing it and went past, we would exceed it going over. If we kept pushing our LOB and stuff up there, we would. I mean, we'd just naturally do that. So I think we're really close. I don't think they expected people to hit it at that, that quickly. So, but there's nothing we can do with that either because that's set also by the tax levy and the adjustments that are made there, so.
And you don't expect that anyone would, because I think a lot of the thinking behind that whole revenue neutral rate was so that taxpayers and community members
Yes.
paid more attention to the budgets
Yes.
of what were going on in their communities. So have you heard any scuttlebutt that they're gonna raise that?
No.
You know, or lower that, so that when we exceed it, we're still on the radar?
Yeah, I think the point you made, I can remember when this all came out, and the talk behind it was the transparency for the taxpayer, because the school district, if you look on the tax, your receipt, it's a big chunk. And at that time, school districts were going up. They were hitting that 33, they were hitting that pretty hard and bringing that back. They were going from the 30s to the 33s or the 28s. And I think this was a nice way to go, well, now we're going to let, all the taxpayers see that and let them have an opportunity to say something about it. So I think it created that transparency. But what happened is they didn't put into factor that, hey, the general's at 20. You can't do, we're going to exceed it. So they would have to adjust the 20, the state would. And I just don't see them. In fact, the last round of legislature, we kind of heard that they were trying to lower it down to, I think, 19. It kind of hit the 18 mark, but it came back up to the 19, and then they decided to leave it alone. So if anything, they're going to have to play with that, but I think playing with it's going to impact other areas that they don't want to address yet. So,
Thank you.
yeah. All right, so going on to what's next. As soon as we get signatures tonight, guess what? The paper is putting it out there for us so that we can get it out there, and then we'll come back for the hearing on 9/11, and then we'll just start communicating. The exciting part about this is once we get this process done, then we can get the building budgets regulated and set for them and meet with them and go over it. And very excited about how the buildings and the district in general handled budgets last year. People did a great job with that and using it, not like they should, but just using it in a really positive manner with just their expenditures and also with, the things they were able to do and what they were able to offer to the students and to the staff. So big shout out for our principals. And also the district office staff. There was all sorts of budget changes that went on in this building too. So very excited about that. I'm looking forward to this year with it. Any questions?
Questions?
I'll just say it's hard, I'm sure, when you're watching this meeting and thinking, well, why aren't they asking more questions? But I'm not an accountant. I work at a bank. I'm not a money person. And if I can't trust what you're telling me, then we have bigger issues. So I come here, I absorb, I do my due diligence as a board member, and we all go to our KASB training every year. But ultimately, we trust you. So thank you for presenting this information in a way that's easy to understand. And that's why I personally don't have a lot of questions.
Thank you. Not thank you for not having questions, but thank you for having. All right.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so on that note, we are on 7C, approval of the notice of hearing to exceed the revenue neutral rate for 2024-2025.
Yeah. I will move to approve the notice of hearing to exceed the revenue neutral rate for the 24-25 year for publication in the Emporia Gazette on August 31st, 2024, and on the USD253 website as submitted.
Second. Motion passes 7-0.
Okay, and then we are on 7D, approval of the notice of hearing for 2024-2025.
I move to approve the publication of the notice of hearing for the 2024-2025 USD 253 budget in the Emporia Gazette is it the same? It is, I'm sorry. On August 31st, 2024, and on the USD 253 website as submitted. Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so future board calendar dates. Our next meeting will be here at Mary Herbert Education Center on Wednesday, September 11th at 6 p.m. Then the next week, Tuesday, September 17th, the Emporia Recreation Steering Committee will be meeting here starting at 7:30 a.m. Then our next regular board meeting will be Wednesday, September 25th here at 6 p.m. And then the next Emporia Recreation Steering Committee meeting will be here October 15th at 7:30 a.m. And that brings us to adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, do my best. Anything for you?